42% of startups fail due to not finding product market fit, according to CB Insights. So having an early founder with product experience or product sense could save a lot of these companies. 80% of the cost of a company with digital products and services are people. So you don't want to increase this cost because over long term, it decreases your contribution margin. It's fine to be a mercenary. Sometimes emotions get in the way. Sometimes you get more done by just being able a bit to disconnect from everything that certain teams have been going through for the past 2 years. There's enough space for us to carve out the niche and be the one known for when someone's product manager goes on parental leave or leaves the company or something happens, we would be the go-to agency.
How can people really put forward their best selves, trying to break into a Product People or a similar agency?
It's a bit boring and long, so we have the LinkedIn Easy Apply, but when easy applying, you need to fill in a few questions, and sometimes people take polishing their CV more seriously than answering those questions. People were laughing at me in the beginning, especially as I'm in Berlin, which is majority venture-funded companies. So I didn't even sound like a real founder to people because...
Hey everyone, I'm really excited about today's episode of the Product Growth Podcast. Today we have Mirela Moose. Mirela, thank you so much for being here.
I'm excited to be here as well.
So if you haven't seen Mirela online yet, she is the founder and CEO of the largest fractional product agency, Product People. It employs over 50 people now, and it's based out of Berlin, Germany. Mirela has spent 12 years in product management at places like the World Health Organization, Zalando, and today we'll be breaking down everything you wanted to know about product agencies. And clearly there couldn't be a bigger expert in the entire field, so I'm really excited. And let's start with learning, what is a product agency and what does the market for product agencies look like?
Sure. Depending who's saying this, for our case, we say we are a product management agency providing interim product management services, sometimes also product ops or program management via our in-house full-time employees. You'll also hear lately full service agencies that have developers and designers switch to a similar wording as a product agency, because in their case, it's a better play to control the scope by sending someone from their side to represent the product management angle, which we wouldn't necessarily advise for, as it creates a principal agent problem. So you'll get two definitions of the market. For the second question, how does the market look like? It's pretty tough to answer. On one hand, you have more talent on the market because of the redundancies we've been experiencing for the last 2 years, which means there are a lot of very senior and qualified people, but fewer exciting roles for them. So I did see, especially for people in leadership roles, going this route in order to speed date companies and see where they would like to land and stay at, because for them as well, it's a reputation risk to be brought in as a product leader somewhere and then not tenure, or just because they have financial obligations and they need to make something work. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it beyond that level, unless, of course, someone has a certain pressure to get these roles, because it's better being in-house while you're still developing yourself and early in the career.
Got it. So you guys are really focused only on the product management part. You're not coming up with these product recommendations and then having a development agency. And I think this is pretty different from your average consulting company. Like you mentioned, there's the development agencies on one side, which are staffing product managers. And a lot of listeners might also be familiar with the larger companies like McKinsey or IBM, where their entire model is based on this, where they sell kind of an exploratory project, where they might sell you a strategy or a product management roadmap, and then they'll sell you the things on the back end to implement that. Why have you guys focused only on the product part of it?
First, it's what I know to do well. And secondly, lots of the clients we work with tend to work with at least 5 agencies, let's say if you're a Series C onwards, and they will pick and choose, and they will test agencies even in the same area of competency against each other. So I saw that there's enough space for us to carve out the niche and be the one known for when someone's product manager goes on parental leave or leaves the company or something happens, we would be the go-to agency. You had a very good point on McKinsey, but even McKinsey differentiates themselves. So the McKinsey, BCG, Bain have as a separate legal entity their strategy and consulting arm, and then they have these digital studios or venture builder arm. And even that is separated. There are different partners there. Of course, they're incentivized to help each other, but there's still a bit of a separation. I would say the more complicated model that could create problem is in large companies like Accenture, who just basically be able to replace half of your business because they have tech and product, but they could also give you customer success people and everything, right? So that their incentive there is to basically tell you to hand over your business to them. Whereas in our case, we are in there to help on this scope and in this functional area for the amount of time that we're needed. And we want to do such a good work that the next time there's a problem, we'll be there.
Is your product team having trouble in capturing the true voice of customers? That's because user feedback is scattered across channels, making it nearly impossible to catch crucial conversations. It's time you're able to centralize your voice of customer from everything like your CRM, customer portals, call recordings, or even public reviews. That's where Zeta.io comes in, our podcast partner today. With Zeta's AI, you can plug your customer conversations in, and it will allow you to easily slice and dice these into actionable insights for your key product areas so that you can do more to improve NPS scores, analyze features, identify new features, or perhaps understand why you lost a few deals. This paves the way for planning the right features and channeling your efforts into actually planning and building your roadmap to finally close that loop 10 times faster. Product managers around the world use Zeta.io and use it to really improve their product discovery. It's plug and play in just minutes. So visit zeta.io/LPS/AkashGupta to get an extra 10% off. Got it. So that almost sounds like interim product work, but there's also this concept of fractional product work. And I think people might be confused about those two terms. And can you help us explain what is interim and fractional work and what do you guys focus on?
So within the interim work, you could also be fractional. Fractional means less than 5 days per week. And you could still be interim and fractional if you do 3 to 4 to 5 days per week. If you scale down to 1 to 2 days a week, then that becomes more advisory or coaching because you can't be really fully embedded if your availability is limited to this time.
So you solve one of the use cases you mentioned is parental leave. That's a really interesting one. What are the other use cases? For instance, would there be one we're looking to hire a PM, but it might take us 6 to 9 months? What are the main reasons a company might think about hiring interim product support?
Exactly. So you touched on a very good point, Akash. Sometimes the need comes from the tactical headcount loss for a temporary amount of time, or there's a FTE role that is becoming vacant. Other times the demand is driven by a certain outcome the company wants to achieve. So usually when you hear about transformation, most people think about this company that used to make tractors or pills and is now trying to digitalize their spreadsheets. But the companies that are at the second or third act, they grew from a small startup to a Series D, and then they publicly listed and so on. They themselves are facing transformations in a lot of areas, and that's more the interesting cases that we look at. The other part is pre-merger and acquisition, post-merger and acquisition, where you have this capacity surge to get a few things done or clear a few things off your deck, while not increasing your permanent headcount, because most of the time, 80% of the cost of a company with digital products and services are people. So you don't want to increase this cost because over long term, it increases your it decreases your contribution margin. So that would be the parts. And then within this area, you could have product-led growth attempts, or more tactical things, discover a new revenue stream, fix our leaking conversion funnel, or improve our subscriber retention, or figure out how to get people to bring in their friends to use our product, right? So it could be this very clear job to be done. It could be something bigger, like we want to transform, and then we need to dig into what do we want to transform and what it's about.
Got it. So there could be headcount driven things, there could be jobs to be done, or transformation. Those sound like the three major buckets.
Yes, I would also put a transformation in a job to be done. And within that transformation, which is a very large word and big area, right? Marty King wrote a whole book about it. You can find various levers. What do you want to transform culturally? Is it tactically? What this would look like? What are the things we could actually do? And does the company really want to do it? Because sometimes they say they want to do that, and then they just ask for coaching or training, which won't arrive at that result.
Got it. Makes sense. So what I'm hearing here is that you guys are coming in and you're basically solving what is often a full-time need for clients, where they would have had a full-time person if they had hired in-house. Are you staffing your people full-time? I believe I read somewhere that your folks are typically 80% allocated. How does that exactly work?
The people we operate our client engagements with are with product people. They go through our recruiting process and then are paid by us monthly. So it's not a freelancer that we pick up from somewhere. We are, of course, friendly towards other agencies and freelancers, but in case that use case arises, we usually would let these parties deal with the client directly, rather than us getting in between and expose our reputation or have more overhead. On the allocation part is, most of the time you can cover a full-time role with 80% of the allocation. And this is because we charge for one headcount, similar to body leasing agencies, and we staff two people. So we will have a senior or a mid-level PM with an associate that supports them behind the scene. And having this duo, which initially sounds super counterintuitive, is extremely effective. It helps us have redundancy and better knowledge sharing, and help also build the next generation. It also covers in case someone gets COVID or wants to take a vacation, but the client has a lot of pressure and a lot of things going on over there. And since we care for our people and want to retain them as much as we can, we don't want to end up at the point where someone postpones vacations a lot just because the client is applying a lot of pressure. So there could be other ways in which we could solve both for the client and for the product people representative with this setup.
That's very cool. So you're hiring for one person, but you're really getting a team. It sounds like you're getting both sort of an apprentice, but also then like a little bit of a manager. So you're getting that core person, 80% with some support. That makes sense.
And there's, of course, the supervision behind the scene, which would be someone like me, a VP of product, a product lead. That person is less involved tactically in the day-to-day, but supervises what our people work on, try to understand the challenges, the political landscape at the client, runs 360 feedback, not only internally, but also within the client engagements. So we understand how things are going, what the perception is of us, and of course, how our people can do better and exceed expectations.
All right. So I hope that gives everybody a good state of the market, good state of how these projects are sold or not sold. Now I want to shift more to your story, because I'm really inspired by your story. Product People has grown really quickly, and I think that people would want to know, like, what inspired you to create this idea? Because as we've covered, it doesn't seem like it was maybe a developed market already. So how did you come to this unique niche of building a product agency?
That's very cool. People were laughing at me in the beginning, especially as I'm in Berlin, which is majority venture funded companies. So I didn't even sound like a real founder to people because I wasn't building a VC-backed play that can IPO or sell to their competitors or do something like that in a few years. I do come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I always felt this pressure that I need to do something. It started with my uncle, who in the 80s ran off from the communism regime in Eastern Europe and ended up building a company in the Netherlands. And then after that same regime fell and there were no jobs, my parents had to start a small company themselves because there was no other option. It wasn't a vanity play. So I always felt this drive, and my life partner also happens to be a founder who has, as far as I know, so far 2 exits, which happened more recently. So back then when I started Product People, it was also the family pressure and also my life partner being very encouraging about it, saying, hey, you seem to be onto something. It doesn't seem that there's a lot going on. Why don't you give it a try? You can always go back to corporate, go back to having a job. And it really helped a lot to get this encouragement, especially since there's not so much support for someone who wants to build an agency, and most people build an agency to then turn it into a SaaS product or more as a lifestyle choice. And I wasn't interested in a lifestyle play as well. Wanted to do something seriously good and that has a chance to compete heads on the market with the strongest companies out there. So that's how it came about, from a personal motivation. I also got bored in all the products I've built. After 6 months or so, I would fall into this routine and felt that there's not a lot happening. The only places where I saw that it was not the case was hyper-growth companies, because if you grow fast enough, then in 6 months it's a totally different company. All the processes and everything you had before that broke apart. Some of the people already changed. New people are coming in. So only that would kind of have the pace of change that I found exciting enough. And I got with that at Product People. So I thought there would be other people like me who may get bored of doing the same thing and want the adrenaline and want the growth and want the experience of seeing behind the scenes of Europe's greatest companies while not getting stuck there for 3 years.
Got it. So did you try doing fractional product work on your own to validate the model, or how did you develop the confidence that this specific niche that we've kind of described as not other people tackling could be one where a business could be built?
Initially, I had this come to me through dev shops who are, of course, looking to sell another development team and had their developers complaining that they don't have enough Jira stories and they needed to have Jira user stories to put in their timesheets and build a client and so on and so forth. So I saw that, and also saw that the type of clients these agencies were selling to were highly unsophisticated. I didn't give them more than 5 to 10 years until they will exit the market. And I saw that most of the top companies in the space weren't so much working with agencies. Their impression was that agencies are bad. They have this half unqualified people there. If they have a product owner, there is more of a delivery manager, has no commercial sense, not so strong communication style. So there were always this problem, and people hated on agencies because of the low bar to enter, which means that you'll have a lot of players on the market, and each of these players does its best, but that doesn't meet lots of people's bar. And seeing that part, on the other hand, when I was in these engagements, I was inheriting decks from the big consulting firms that were all fluffy, puffy, and big, and they had sold this 3-year vision and plan to the client what they should build. Of course, it was made by someone who hadn't built digital products, so it was over-scoped and overinflated. Of course, you kind of tried to sell a vision, but then this client struggled to go to market with that. Like, how do you make it small enough to test? And it was in nobody's interest. The dev shop didn't want to make this smaller. They didn't want to cut some of the fat because they wanted to staff another development team. That was like the only discussions I was having over there. Is like, yeah, but if they want this and that, let's pitch another dev team. And can you write more user stories? So I thought, there should be a better way, because at some point the market is going to catch up. And I like to think that if you play long-term games with long-term people, you're going to be in a better place than if you have this type of win-lose tactics, which are going to hurt at some point. So that was the approach that we took. We took the harder route of looking for companies who are really demanding in terms of what they expect from product management. But at the same time, they're also some of the best in Europe. And that brought us a lot of eager candidates who want to work with us to experience these companies, to see what they can learn there. And sometimes it's like, don't meet your heroes. And other times it's super impressive. And in all the cases, you've learned something along the way that really leaves you better off. So it's not only the clients learning from us, we also learn from them. So how you had this part with the Roman Empire, whenever they went somewhere else, they incorporated one of the deities that they met across there, because it's like, oh, the goddess of fortune, which we discovered near the Black Sea. That's cool. Let's throw it there next to Zeus and whoever. So that's like, I feel that this is also very good for us, and it's also good for the clients, because we all learn from each other and we just get better as we move along. Whereas for the cases where there's a pretty big gap between the specialization, it's sometimes harder to help them and for them to get up to speed, because it will take a super big leap from that side, and not every company is ready.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think that's a really crucial insight for listeners, is you really got deep into some of the dynamics of some of the sort of segments in the market of buyers for agencies. You then I figured out, okay, there's this segment that is really not, their needs aren't being served at all. They have this high bar for PMs. They're not able to trust the development agencies. So that's where we come in. We develop an offer. It seems like, based on other interviews as well, that offer really caught on for things like parental leave and for other sort of headcount areas that we were talking about at the beginning. How did your offer evolve over time to where it is today?
We discovered pretty early on that we wanted to have the backup and have a more junior person, and we iterated various ways to have that support us, because the client wasn't always getting it from the first try. Funnily enough, developers always got it sooner, because they were like, you have a redundancy. And you have a backup. I understand backups, is good to have them. So that was pretty easy. Engineering managers got it pretty well. And other times there would be a more timid leader who was afraid of conflict internally. And they were like, how am I going to explain to people, because we're now in a headcount reduction time, and this may seem insensitive that I'm bringing to people while I'm also stopping hiring and managing out potentially. So there were always these parts of figuring out how to position ourselves as helping the company. We're not taking a full headcount role. We're here to support temporary, and we'll support in whichever area is needed. So that took a bit of iteration, and also from our side to find the best model to work. What are the playbooks? What kind of people do we recruit for this role? Because you need a pretty low ego footprint to be the leader or the follower in some of these interactions. And sometimes, let's say, if we would staff a lead product role, then that person would come with a product manager, not with an associate, because the gap would be too big to cover. So then that product manager needs to be very confident to follow when they're leading a mission, and they need to be very confident in accepting someone else's leadership and making, of course, relevant suggestions when that is not the case. And since product management is a bit of a lonely job, and you have a lot of these lonely wolves running around in companies and kind of competing for the same promotion cases or the same budget that gets towards one or two headcounts that could be promoted every half a year or a year, it's pretty hard to build this collaborative arm. So that was also some of the insights that we figured out, like not only how we position and organize the service, but what are the people that are going to thrive here and have a very good time and really like that they have the emotional and tactical support of others that they can trust and lean on while things may be super crazy at the client, and not try to be the hero in everything or take all the credit or throw some people under the bus, because that could be like some habits people may need to unlearn from other organizations which don't have this psychological safety.
It's fascinating to hear how really specific engagements have evolved your offer over time. So now that you've gotten an offer that seems to work, and I've heard you kind of talk about the same offer for the last few years, so it feels like this offer, you've figured out there's product market fit. Then you've scaled really rapidly, and I've seen the headcount grow really quickly at Product People. Talk to us a little bit about that scaling. Like, what has enabled you guys to scale so quickly? Is it that you're seeing a lot of demand from repeat clients? Is it that people are understanding more of your market offer? What has been the keys to your quick scaling?
That's a very good question, and I would like to take credit for COVID and zero interest rate policy era and just the current VUCA we're in, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity times. But we were just the right thing at the right time on the market. And we got accelerated by starting out of Berlin, where I had a pretty strong network in the startup scale-up space. Berlin did, and Germany by extension, quite well by having a super friendly visa policy and being relatively cheap for a while. Now rent has exploded and salaries are the same as in London almost. So that went away pretty fast. But being in this space at the right time where companies were getting all this VC money with almost zero due diligence, if you listen to all the podcasts and all the crazy things that happen, and after they gotten the VC money, they have a 3 months time frame to show them at the next board meeting what they've achieved. And that was sometimes a lot of the demand that was coming in. So we were having lots of Series B onwards, lots of hypergrowth clients. Despite travel taking a complete nosedive, which were our initial clients, we had e-commerce pop up like crazy. And during those times, we signed Zalando because e-commerce was doing incredibly well. And then the war started in Russia, so supply chains felt lots more pressure. And at the same time, people were starting to get out of the house. And you had e-commerce go down, but then mobility and travel kept picking up. And at the same time, you had health techs on a different investment timeframes, which is usually like 7 years. So we're a bit more patient VCs. And to sum it up, I think it was the timing, the fact that we were friendly towards multiple industries is probably going to be one of my contrarian comments below, that I don't value industry expertise in our PMs. And I think this is over-indexed on when they should be looking at other things. And one of the biggest acquisition and retention factors, one of the biggest acquisition levers we had is people working with us in company one, moving to company B and bringing us there. And then this company B moving to company C, but at the same time, the people from company B were moving to D and E and bringing us there. And we can even trace our entry into some companies by the fact that some people we've worked with in the previous company had brought us in. And of course, this didn't stop unless that company did pretty poorly. They would still come back every year or every 2 years, because depending on their size and staff fluctuation, there's going to be always something to be fixed last minute. And most of the time they ask themselves or ask internally, hey, do we have an agency that we know for X? That was, by the way, also one of the observations I had on the market, that unlike tech, this is not a winner takes all. Most of the clients don't want to hedge their wagon to one agency. So the smart ones would have even the same role from 3 agencies, especially for developers, or even segment and say, okay, we know that this company has very good backend Java or Python. This other company has good mobile apps developers. And then maybe this other one is kind of second best. So let's engage both of them. Let's kind of mix them together so there's a bit less chance of a collusion. and not be held hostage if there's a price increase or if that company has some other idea of what they want to do. And then this makes also this model a bit more resilient, but at the same time harder to scale because we're in a red ocean and we know that the clients tend to balance their choices and especially not concentrating too much into one vendor. So it's only companies who haven't digitalized yet would externalize tech and product and everything to an external provider.
Very interesting. So what I'm hearing is that it's a little bit more of a product-led growth strategy than a marketing, because it's not that you opened up some new marketing channel to acquire leads or that awareness significantly grew. It's that you had repeat clients who are moving to different companies and they're helping evangelize it. And so the reason it's then product-led is because you have this good engagement and you're fundamentally doing a good job at these engagements, and that's what drove your success. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and this is also something that we track, because acquiring a B2B customer is extremely hard and expensive. We're also not the most sophisticated on the sales funnels, and most of the companies out there are also skeptical of agencies because it's so easy to enter. Lots of people do it as a cash grab, or, hey, I'm going to do this for 1-2 years, especially with freelancing, and then I'm going to exit, so I kind of don't care what I'm leaving behind. So just this thing of, hey, we want to make sure we have a good reputation and we do a good job, and just making sure we internalize this in our principles and processes and how we do things. This brings repeat customers, but it doesn't bring repeat customers as fast as we would like to. We just got lucky with the initial start with the Berlin tech scene being full of people who really can't stay more than 1 year in a job or more than 2 years. So they kind of went around everywhere. Now this has slowed down, so I'm seeing people making it to 2 to 3 years, which I think is also good for the market, not having this skip.
That's hilarious. I love how humble you are, but I think it is really a lot of you building the right culture for PMs to be able to succeed when they drop into these interim engagements. And that's where I want to move to next, because a lot of people, they've heard the story now, they've heard the market. Now they're thinking how do we succeed either at one of these agencies or as one of these agencies? And so let's start with kind of the high level framing for everybody. We know that, you're being plopped in at an agency, but peeling one layer deeper than that, what are the key differences between working through an agency at 80% allocation versus independently as a freelancer for a company?
It's pretty hard to say how it is, because each independent does things the way they've learned. Our people are on our payroll, so they need to deal with less overhead. They need to worry about doing a good job and being a great team member and also contributing to our company. Whereas if you're a freelancer, you're kind of a one-person company. You need to do all the admin stuff. You're taking all the legal risk. You're also taking the risk of non-payment, which, for example, in Europe, you can bail on paying vendors before you declare insolvency and so on. So there's a liability when you don't pay your employees, because, of course, the European states are quite protective of labor. And what would happen when companies start having trouble? The first ones that they don't pay are their vendors. And then they start doing sometimes layoffs and so on. So basically, if you're working as an independent, imagine you're a B2B company and you have to deal with all the problems that come with that. But at the same time, have none of the support because it's just going to be by yourself. For our side, we also have someone that starts by outlining the expectations of the client. So there's the whole sales process where our people can contribute to, and there's a bonus if they make introductions and so on, but they're not required. They can also volunteer themselves for being staffed on certain engagements when the probability of those materializing becomes stronger, then we start making these opportunities known internally. And then from contract signature onwards, we would have someone that kicks off the engagement and goes to the what we call a champion at this client, so it's the budget owner. All right, let's recap. You said this is the problem. This would be success after 3 months with us, and then like a usual playbook of who should we talk to, can we get access to these tools, and so on, and also follows up on that. Whereas sometimes we were in parallel with other agencies at the client, and these people didn't have their accounts set up, who didn't have gotten certain things. Whereas we even had an internal playbook on how to get access at that specific client, because it was already our third, fourth engagement. It was like, okay, for this we do that, for analytics we do this. And it was just like a Notion page, and we were asking our ops person, hey, get a provision laptop for this person that's now rolling into the engagement, because this person is taking a sabbatical and rolling off.
This episode is brought to you by Adio, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. Adio makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up Adio takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, you'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. Adio lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. Adio is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to adio.com/product growth, and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's Makes sense. So really, if I summarize, like as a independent trying to do fractional or interim work, you're dealing with sales, you're dealing with billing, you're dealing with a lot of overhead. And at an agency, your problems are slightly different. You're dealing with getting staffed onto the right projects, putting yourself out there for the right projects, succeeding at those projects, working with the operations teams internally. So really, if we think about it, the agency model is a slightly different job that requires, especially in the IC layer, slightly different skills. I imagine as you progress, though, at an agency, sales becomes a bigger and bigger part of your role, and you'll have to take on those responsibilities as well. Is that fair?
To some degree. So there's still someone that shepherds the client to different steps and would take the initial calls. But it's more helpful if someone who understands product management and has done this engagement themselves helps scope it, because then we can estimate the complexity. So there are sometimes cases we don't take on because they were our most difficult. For example, a very young startup wants to pay for an associate, a junior position, but actually needs a senior because they haven't found product market fit and are not in a good traction for it, and so on. And you wouldn't know that if you hadn't done product yourself. You say, okay, the client has only this budget, let's offer an associate, and then the person will end up there, the client will be unhappy, they will be running out of the door, and we will take a potential reputation hit, or we will need to replace now that person with a more senior person, but then lose money on this and still have some friction. So it's pretty hard to figure out what to do. And I think this is why in the traditional consulting model, you end up with the partners being salespeople, because they grew through the ranks from individual contributors running these engagements themselves. And they were like, okay, if the client says this, they mean that, or if they're asking for these things, those can be the problems, and this is the level of complexity, and starts getting better at it. And we also encourage our people to support in this. The way the job changes as they move through the ranks is that they would get direct reports and also be required to sometimes supervise these missions. So we would have two people at the client, one of them being primary, the other one as a backup, but then they need to be supported by someone more senior behind the scenes, or even on a leadership level, And that's where the progressing through the ranks part comes in.
Got it. So that's another difference, I think, for people is if you're working on your own, you truly are on your own versus at an agency, you're going to have a manager. You might have a leadership person who's been responsible for selling it. So it is more akin, I would say, to working at a consultancy. And one interesting thing about consultancies, for instance, I worked at Kearney, is they often will hire like a lot of experts that are very highly paid, but they just do it as a fraction of their time. And so some of the people listening might think, oh, maybe I could work for an agency like Product People for a fraction of my time. But actually, you guys have a model of being fully in-house, which means that employees have to work full-time for Product People if they want to work for your clients. Can you explain why you made that decision?
So I'm very excited about system speaking and solving for what's in it for me, what's in it for the client, what's in it for the employee type of thing. If I remember, the founder of Airbnb had a famous quote, which I would wish to be able to reproduce directly. It was around the lines of, for Airbnb to be successful, they need to have 4 stakeholder groups that are happy. The travelers, the hosts, the community, and their shareholders. And it's similar for us. What are we doing for our clients to be happy and successful? What are we doing for our employees to be happy and successful? What are we doing for our shareholders to get the most out of this financially? And then what are we doing for the wider product management community? And you can't align incentives if you don't have something to offer rather than putting a commission on top of a day rate of a freelancer. And also my observation of the market for people who do this, sometimes it's just a way to fill in the gap until they look for full-time role, especially in the leadership position. I would even recommend that because it takes a long time to find a CPO or VP or director role. And a lot of this part is so much culture and politics and the way the company does things. And most of the time, product is on the receiving end of all the absolutely bad stuff that happens. So maybe it's also better for your reputation to try before you buy, right? You could find, especially if the company is earlier stage, you find an earlier stage company, you propose that, hey, let's do this for 3 to 6 months, and then we can turn this into permanent. And this way, if it's not a mutual fit, you can say, well, I'm not renewing the engagement, I've made other commitments, or just not renewing the engagement. And for the company, doesn't feel like a leadership person came and exited after a few months, like Tesla had at some point a run through a few CFOs, and the press were making fun of it. So that's a very good use case. But also most of our demand comes at IC level, so product manager, senior PM. We would even recommend that leadership should be in-house because we've done interim leadership roles. I have done that myself through post-merger and acquisition, reorg, and everything. And it's super tough, especially as an external. And you have all to deal with the sensibilities of the company, with powerful departments like HR and other groups, while at the same time having the direct reports, knowing that you're not going to be there for a very long time, and sometimes trying to bypass you, sometimes trying to undercut you. Whereas for the same cost at the client, we could have had 2 or 3 ICs and run a whole stream almost. So I would have definitely next time proposed for the client to get maybe promote from within or get someone in else there, and we could take care of the hands-on stuff. Not that I didn't like doing it. I think it was also eye-opening to understand what the people who bring us in go through, but it's pretty tough to pull out as an external. Harder to also replicate and playbook and all of that because you're just dealing with people's feelings and politics, which are harder to assess unless you're like in the middle of it there.
Yeah, Jason Knight and I did a study of 20 fractional leaders, and we did hear from a lot of them that it's so tough. It's probably tougher than your average full-time gig because of the reasons you described. So it's very interesting to hear that you're getting more demand at the IC level. So let's think about those potential ICs. These people, you know, a lot of them, they would want to understand, like, if product people if product people, I think, is primarily based in Europe, if I'm in Asia or if I'm in the US, are there other agencies out there that they could work for, like product people?
I honestly haven't seen that many. I think this is pretty hard to do. And at the same time, it's just easier to set up a development agency. And many times we have like every 10th employee that join us or so says, why aren't we selling developers? While we sell a PM, we could sell 5 developers. Why aren't we doing that? Right? So it's so much easier to do in these roles that get even less face time inside the organization. So you don't have that many discussions with the staffing and culture fit and all of that. I wouldn't know. I mean, I hope we become as successful that will be in the US and in Asia, and they wouldn't need to worry about anything. We could just apply to work for product people.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I think some of the people listening to this podcast are going to try to start product people in the US and Asia. What can they learn from your hiring process? And let's also speak to those ICs who want to work at product people, because a lot of them in Europe will be listening and saying, hey, I do want to work for product people. What is your hiring process look like? And what have you learned about the types of people who will really succeed at product people?
So we did notice that people who adapt pretty fast, which I know sounds a bit like a cliche, but it's a bit of a personality trait. Do you have high cognitive flexibility, a bit of a lower ego footprint? Can you pivot and do some things that are not necessarily in complete agreement with how you would run this if it was your product department and your product, but still can see the bigger picture of this is what the champion and the client wants at this point. We can lose a few battles, but overall it will be good, or we can try later to influence. So the people who didn't have a good time with us were usually quite inflexible around this should be done in this specific way, or becoming a bit too negative too fast. So we look for a serious get shit done attitude, high cognitive flexibility, this desire to fix the mess. It's just a personality thing. I mean, I'm more comfortable in this type of environments because you can make a pretty fast impact. You know, it's like sorting out your garage or basement. You know, at the end of it, you have like a sorted place, and it looks better than it started. And another part that scales very well in our business is when people talk openly about things, have this drive to push, but at the same time maintain a certain level of kindness and friendliness, right? So how can you be extremely pushy, but in a very kind and friendly way so that you don't piss people off?
Makes sense. So we've covered, I think, really thoroughly how you might get into one of these agencies and what the unique sort of characteristics are from an individual point of view. Now let's shift hats and move into the company point of view, because a lot of people might have been listening up until now and they say, okay, this is great. I understand the market. I understand the story. I understand who they're hiring. I want to hire an agency like this. Who are the right types of people who should be hiring an interim product agency, and who might be the wrong ones?
So if I'm thinking of the reasons we usually get in, it's a certain staffing gap or outcome driven. It's pretty hard to define the companies who wouldn't be a fit. We have that from either interaction experience with them. So the obvious things, one of our people may have reported being not treated fairly or discriminated, or the client doesn't pay their invoices, or tries to aggressively poach our people. We have a handover fee, but in general, we would like to be given a heads up because we don't like surprises. So there are certain behaviors like we also don't think it's fair to poach from clients. So we wouldn't do that from active clients, and we would expect the opposite, but we would expect the same behavior. But of course, if there's a great mutual fit, we could have that. The other part, we look at that from a client, are they in an area that's net positive to humanity? So one of the clients we decided to not pursue would be gambling companies. Because if you look at all the statistics and everything around that, it just makes life worse for people who are already in a vulnerable situation financially. And there's enough demand out there that we can also leave this to other people. So even if sometimes we, help e-commerce companies sell more shoes, we still like to think in general we're doing better for humanity and not actively doing something harmful, which we would consider in the case of maximizing retention for a gambling company. I hope this helps with who we would work to and who we would not work to. If you want more of a customer segmenting of like what we would consider at which stage, I would advise clients to approach us post-product market fit. So sometimes we would have that Series A plus, and in general, we're best suited for digital-first companies. That needs to be said in Europe because sometimes there's a bit of catch-up to be done there. And this is also because the type of change and transformation we do is easier and more understood when you already have something, right? Because a lot of people complain about sales-led companies or digital, marketing-led companies, but they still have a sense, they've used some tooling. Like imagine if you're a pharma and peddles things like product owner and agile and hasn't even like set up a proper functional tech team before. Those have been a bit harder to help because they usually just get sold by these super large companies that then convince them to outsource everything, and it puts them in a worse position than they were when they started. And so our approach was to just focus on the people who get us. More of the positioning advice from April Dunford, right? Just like, it's nice to read negative feedback and to improve on that and so on, but what if you turn it the other way around? Which are the customers who really love you, who actively recommend you to other customers, who get your service, who buy your service, don't cause drama, renew, and so on, and just try to multiply that. That was my aha moment for reading that book. It felt so, it's kind of like in dating. Why want people who don't want you, don't appreciate you? Just go for the non-drama people, and life would be just better for everyone.
Okay, so if you're a company thinking about hiring a fractional product agency, some of the takeaways I would synthesize from our conversation are ideally post-product market fit. Ideally, a software or a hardware tech company, not another company that's putting tech in as part of the product. And then ideally, you're a company that has a specific IC sort of need. There might be a PM who's leaving. There might be a type of product manager you want to hire that you don't have expertise for. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it's a fair summary. It could also be that they would consider how to set up their product and tech org, and we could advise on that specific. But most of the time we were brought in after this was unsuccessful 1 or 2 times. So we haven't been like the first one in there.
Makes sense. And I think that goes back to our original discussion around these leadership, bringing someone in for leadership. It's possible, but it tends to be harder. It needs to be driven sort of in-house there. So I think that's a really strong takeaway for people. So when you think about hiring you guys, how should somebody think about the pricing? What is the pricing that could potentially they need to pay? Is it going to be some percentage higher than what it would have been if they hired in-house? And what are the factors that are going to influence that cost? People always think about level. You mentioned people probably try to go for too junior of a level sometimes. What are those other factors?
In the agency model, you have 2 ways of doing this. Fixed cost or time and material, which means you have a bid and the client decides to pay 100K or 200K, and all the agencies end up reverse engineering into time and material, because most agencies, also like ourselves, have a set of levels people get assigned a salary based on the level, and that already changes, which to some degree is way more fair than many other companies out there, where we've seen sometimes 50% discrepancy within the same level just because someone negotiated better and other stuff. For us, it's not that case. And in our experience, we learned that we like time and material more, because this is the whole incentivized to do well. If we're useful, we stay more. If the usefulness has ended and our mission has completed, we wrap up. Whereas if you have time and material, we would be incentivized to do less, right? To have a higher margin. The client would be incentivized to sometimes scope creep, and it ends up being a bit of a conflictual relationship. And of course, it works in these like super big setups where an agency oversells the role, and then a lot of these roles aren't utilized. As I had this example where they had a DevOps that was just built there, but there wasn't any software to deploy because they hadn't even like figured out what we want to do. And so that would be my preference. And then in terms of pricing, in Europe, you can look at between 12 to 20K per month as an area. It is more expensive than an FTE, but it depends how you calculate the FTE. Because in Europe, if you want to terminate a contract, you need to pay a 3 months notice. And depending on the tenure of that employee, it's usually half a month to an extra month, if you can terminate that contract at all. So there are different exotic things that happen over here in the labor law that prevent companies from doing so. So some companies may always want to have part of their workforce on an easy to untangle type of contract due to just these regulatory restrictions. Also, many companies are not aware that if an employee, let's say, negotiates a 100K salary, they don't pay 100K, they will pay 120 to 125K as the all-in cost, because there's this like top-up cost as an employer. And then depending on the country, the employee gets taxed 24 to 40%, or just also that varies wildly. And you have overhead cost internally, which is HR and admin and everything in between. So that depends as well if clients price it in of like what's the total cost of having an FTE, including recruiting them and offboarding them. If you think of the complete life cycle, of course, not all FTEs will end up being fired, right? Probably have 10, 20% that won't work out, but still that's a significant cost, and they could still calculate that in their model.
Yeah, this is exactly the finding we had for fractional product people who aren't through an agency as well. Is they're going to charge that 25 to 40% premium. And the basis of that is because your all-in cost already is similar when you factor in termination, benefits, and all these other things.
Yeah, I think they should charge more because you also take the risk, right? For you don't know when the next one is going to be lined up. But you offer the client the flexibility to change their mind anytime. And it's also a bit more of a transactional relationship. It doesn't need to be super painful or dramatic if they decide that they have other priorities at that point. Whereas if a full-time employee is fired, it's at least statistically one of the most traumatic events, as high ranking as a divorce and so on. So it's also more impactful for the person on the receiving end. But at the same time, as a fractional or an agency, you need to be paid for taking that risk onto you. So someone needs to get paid for this.
Makes sense. So the last thing is, do you ever find that you need to educate clients about how to best utilize your services? What are the common sort of misconceptions they have about, oh, I want you guys to do this, and you have to say, oh no, actually this would be a better way to think about it?
So there's still a bit of difference than being in-house. If you're an in-house employee, you're trying to figure out the whole company. We don't try to figure out the whole company, especially if the company is super big. We're generally focusing in the beginning on what does the champion or budget owner want. And sometimes that's the that's the good and the bad stuff. Because then they would be like, oh, these people are not doing random coffee chats with someone from finance. Well, we're not working with finance. Our group is this. So like, why go around chasing this when we got brought in for a mission and it's like next thing. So sometimes the confusion is that we should act fully as full-time employees. We do adapt to the culture, and many times people think that we're acting more as part of the team than the team itself, because the team sometimes has its own agenda, some historical relationship hiccups, and so on and so forth. And sometimes the client doesn't know how to direct our people, but that's why we also have the supervision. So we try sometimes to translate from them or focus their effort or understand if we're overcommitting to something and should we reduce that scope or should we refocus the commitment. So I've noticed that people who are more experienced in working with agencies also start thinking of the motivations of those agencies. I was speaking with someone who ended up working on the governmental side, and I was complaining that at some client, like at each contract renewal, they had another price negotiation, and that went down and down and down and down. And at the same time, they liked a few people who had already promoted out of that seniority long ago. And it was this train crash, right? On one hand, you had the decreasing prices. On the other hand, we had the increasing cost. And at the same time, for their next career progression, our people wanted a different type of challenge. So at some point, we found the right time and had this conversation with the client and slowly eased in other people who would be at the level needed for that engagement. And it was still like not that great for us. And that other person says, yes, this is what I keep also telling my stakeholders, that if you're going to pressure the agencies on the prices, at some point they're going to give you less senior people, because agencies are also not stupid, right? Just they want to make money. So there's going to be some sort of reckoning sometime. So I did notice that the clients who have gone through a few iterations were working with vendors are pretty fast at signing the contracts, get more reliable with their commitments, or follow up when they say, well, we love you, but the budget ran out. So this is how much you have left. Let's use it wisely. So it becomes more mature on both sides. And that's something we also look forward to when we appraise our long-term partners.
Is your product team having trouble in capturing the true voice of customers? That's because user feedback is scattered across channels, making it nearly impossible to catch crucial conversations. It's time you're able to centralize your voice of customer from everything like your CRM, customer portals, call recordings, or even public reviews. That's where Zeta.io comes in, our podcast partner today. With Zeta's AI, you can plug your customer conversations in, and it will allow you to easily slice and dice these into actionable insights for your key product areas so that you can do more to improve NPS scores, analyze features, identify new features, or perhaps understand why you lost a few deals. This paves the way for planning the right features and channeling your efforts into actually planning and building your roadmap to finally close that loop 10 times faster. Product managers around the world use Zeta.io and use it to really improve their product discovery. It's plug and play in just minutes. So visit zeta.io/LPS/AkashGupta to get an extra 10% off. What I'm hearing is that you don't want to jump in to an agency discussion, especially with a product agency, and immediately just narrow in on cost or narrow in on, hey, they need to be a full-time employee. You want to be a little bit more open to understanding like what is the right level and then what is the mission they are on, and allow them to focus in on that mission, because they are a bit more of a mercenary. They're coming in to achieve a specific thing. And so those are the key misconceptions people have.
Yes, and having this mature discussion, these people need to be pointed at an outcome or a thing. Where are we pointing them? that's what we need.
Awesome. So I hope that gives everybody who's wanting to work at an agency, hire an agency, or start your own, all the information you need. All right. So we're going to move into the lightning round now. This is a little bit more fun, a little bit more playful. Let's start with, what is your favorite hobby?
Reading. I know it sounds very boring, but I love reading utopian sci-fi. So I like spending my downtime just doing nothing and reading.
Love it. That used to be me too, especially Isaac Asimov. What's your favorite interview question?
Something around the line of, what did you leave behind to be here today? Or future looking, 2 years from now, what should have happened for this specific thing to be awesome?
Got it. And let's talk about that second question for a second. What is the right or wrong way to answer that?
Don't think there's a right or wrong way. For us, we try to have people who will be successful employee, and a successful employee stays at least 2 years and promotes at least once. So I'm interested to see if we can offer people what they want, but they must also want that. So it wouldn't be a wrong answer if you say, yeah, I want to do a bit of interim because I don't know what to do else. And that will also be a perfectly valid answer. We're looking for people whom we could give what we have to offer to, if it makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. So you do a lot of reading of sci-fi utopian novels. What about nonfiction? What is your favorite product or growth book?
Product of growth. I saw this question in advance and I thought about it a lot because I don't know what to say. I really liked thinking in bets. It's not a product or growth book, but it kind of is, if you think about it, because everything we do day to day is decision, short term, long term. I need to think of second order effects of the consequence of not doing this, the opportunity cost and everything. And that stayed more in my thoughts than other product books I've read.
Love it. And you also mentioned April Dunford's book on positioning. So we'll link to both of those for people interested. What's a recent newsletter that you've been reading?
I've been trying to widen a bit my view from product. So there won't be product recommendations. I absolutely love Matt Levine's writing from Bloomberg. I've been following him, I think, since 2018 or so, and catch up on his newsletters. He has this great way of explaining complex financial instruments or companies in a funny and short way. Always comments on recent events or changes, especially in this area. And it's how I want to write at some point, as concise, but it's also as extremely funny as he does. And a similar example is Scott Galloway. His style is a bit different. I found him through the We What the Fuck article a long time ago when WeWork wanted to do this initial public offering. And I was like, who is this person? Now I need to go back and read all his things.
I love both of those writers. They're phenomenal. And they also bring consistent quality of insights that aren't available somewhere else on the internet, which I think is really cool. What's something very few people know about you?
I'm relatively introverted, which is probably obvious from the reading hobby. And I judge that by recharging when being alone. So I realize as much as I love certain people and talking with them and so on, it exhausts me after a while. So my best holidays have been the do nothing in a spa or a sauna and just read and put my phone in safe deposit box type of holidays. Whereas I have friends who just want to party on a boat and that they do over the weekend. And then they go back to the office that's full of people. And I'm like, oh, this sounds like a horrible nightmare for me. I don't want to be in a group of people in the weekend and then go in another big group of people for work. I do that for work, it's fine, but on my free time, I just want to be alone for a bit.
That's hilarious. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
I gotten addicted to playing Polytopia. It's this game where I also like their monetization. It's not an asshole monetization type. It's that the more you want to unlock more characters in the game, you need to buy them. And it's like this $1 to $3 type of transaction. And then the game becomes more complex and more complex. So I feel it's a very simple game, very well done, and it doesn't have shady monetization tactics.
I love Polytopia. I used to work at Epic Games, so I used to do a lot of mobile gaming. What product feature or product are you most proud of shipping?
Oh, I like it. At one client, I did what they wanted me to do, but at the same time, I was setting the breadcrumbs for something that should be more valuable for them in the future. And these were, when you would look at a certain item, you get an outfit created for that via an algorithm. At that time, it was a newer transformer model. And initially, that company had pay people to wear clothes and have this human-based outfits as their main initiative for more than a year. And I felt that wouldn't be sustainable financially. And at the same time, if you're an e-commerce company, you need to take pictures of your merchandise. So you already have the picture. You already know what these people bought and kept and looked at and so on. So that were like some of the side experiments that we did. And it ended up panning out so well that it brought up the numbers for H1 for the business unit that we were in, while at the same time we were supporting what they put in as their main priorities, because you needed to take care of the P0s that were company-wide, then P1s were group level, and then I had my P2s to fill in with this A/B test on the things that I really believed on, and I got super lucky with. So if you're on one of the major European shopping sites and you look at some certain things, at some point you're going to start getting these little squares of outfit recommendations, and I'm very proud to have worked on those for a while.
That's awesome. I think that's the magic of product, is when the product manager fits in some potentially high risk but high reward bets like that, and then they pay off. So that's a wonderful story. What commonly held belief or saying do you disagree with?
I think we touched upon the part of domain expertise. I would also say that it's fine to be a mercenary. Sometimes emotions get in the way. Sometimes you get more done by just being able a bit to disconnect from everything that certain teams have been going through for the past 2 years. And the other part is that we don't need to play to the promotion cycles of that organization. So we only care for the champion and budget owner that brings us in. That's the only person we need to please, and we need to make that person look good. And to some extent, that clarifies our thinking tremendously. And even if the organization is pulling in a different direction, which sometimes is sadly the case, it won't confuse us. It will slow us down, but it won't be a cause for confusion, which sometimes stops PMs and makes a lot of teams disappointed and demotivated in our experience.
Awesome. Great to end on that hot take. I think we could go 90 minutes just there, but
yeah.
Since we're at our time, where can people find you online?
Oh, LinkedIn and email. So the usual places. I'm not so much on the other social media because I don't care for Instagram or other things that much.
Okay, so we'll include her information in the description if you want to reach out. And how can listeners help you?
Introduce candidates who may be a good fit. If you would also like to work with us, let me know. If you find some piece of content which I would find interesting to read, I'm an avid reader. And if you're somewhere in Europe where I'll be speaking at or traveling to, I'm always happy to meet in person, since we work remotely most of the time. So I really try to get the most out of the in-person interactions.
Awesome. I hope to see some photos of coffee chats with Mirela in the future. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show